What shall we do with a drunken sailor? What shall we do with a drunken sailor? What shall we do with a drunken sailor early in the morning? Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning. Put him in a longboat till he's sober, put him in a longboat till he's sober, put him in a longboat till he's sober early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises, hooray, and up she rises early in the morning.
The place of our birth is always special to us. The streets we grew up in, the open spaces that were our playground. All of these have great meaning for us. They're our background. They make us what we are. We feel a sense of ownership over them. In some strange way they belong to us. And when these familiar places change, the change they do, we resent it. But change is a natural and constant process. And an old medieval town like Kings Lynn has seen much over its 1,000 years history. And yet for each generation, for all of those changes, but for all that length of time, it remains much the same.
This is me, Gwendolyn Panton, who was born in Lawson's Yard, number 6 I think, in 1918, and I spent all my childhood there, playing with all who were the children around there. But of course families had parties in those days, didn't they? Well, we all mixed together, and we used to go to British Legion parties, or what was that, the club where the ladies belonged to? I sometimes forget them names, and all sorts of things. Tom and I done everything. I played with all the kids in the yard, and it was rough and tumble, I can tell you, but good times. I wish they were here now. My grandmother lived at the Beehive in Bridge Street, and we had all families sort of together.
Beehive was a
pub,
was it?
Yeah, the Beehive. Yeah, it was a pub years ago, and then later on that was the soldiers were all stationed there. So it's a big house now owned by Mr. Waite, and the soldiers were there, and the horses and so on. But no, I don't remember that. But I know what happened to that house.
Law's Yard is gone, and Bridge Street has changed somewhat. The houses on the east side have been replaced by Hillington Square, and there's more greenery. But the Greenland fishery still stands, and despite that curse of modern man, the motor car, St Margaret's Church can still be seen in the distance, as it has been for nearly 1,000 years. Round the corner on the Mill Fleet, there's been more evident changes. Cars there move where once there was only boats, but the outline of St Margaret's School is still recognisable to those who know. And the tranquil sounds of water has been replaced by the noise of the internal combustion engine. And at the top of the Fleet, the crossing still stands, but the mouth-watering sight of Back's Fish and Chip Shop, along with Snushalls and Tuddenham's, so popular with the crowds of hungry travellers which once thronged this busy bus fleet, has unfortunately vanished forever, and only the memory remains. But not a stone's throw away, and in the heart of the Hillington Square complex lies All Saints Church. And that sits here unchanged, offering comfort and sanctuary, as it has done since Anglo-Saxon times.
The church has existed here, as I say, since Saxon times, and originally, of course, people would have been baptised in the river, probably the River Nar, which runs quite close to the church. In a document in the Cathedral Library at Norwich, when the prior of the Cathedral Church at Norwich was considering building another priory here in Kings Lynn, which now is St Margaret's Priory Church, which was finished in 1101, it actually states the land that was given for the Priory Church to be built, St Margaret's, was to be near the church of William de Stangrey. This is the church of William de Stangrey. The Normans were extremely religious, and often they knocked down the Saxon churches, not in a sacrilegious way, but in order to rebuild them in stone. And here at All Saints then, we were actually rebuilt. But throughout many centuries, the original church was enlarged and beautified, all to the glory of God, under various patrons. And so as time went on, the height of the church was increased, so more light could be let in through the clerestory level. A tower was built 83 foot high with a 30-foot spire on the top, which unfortunately fell down in the 18th century. But having said that, that is really the only great change which has occurred here in all the centuries. For the better part, the church is now as it was then.
At the top of the Mill Fleet stands the library, which still looks much the same as it did on its opening in 1904. And Tower Gardens is pristine and beautiful since its recent renovations. And the tower watches over us as it always has. A haven of peace and tranquility for the weary and those who just want to sit and look. And in St James Street only the shops have changed. And where, oh where did Madame Eileen go? Tower Street has been pedestrianised and is much busier these days, but the range of shops is just as diverse. But Miles the chemist is long gone, and its proprietor, Mr. Knights, can no longer fill the requests for his special cough mixture, dark brown and thick, that an older generation always swore by. And the post office on Baxter's Plain has replaced the beautiful Athenaeum Club, which once graced this area. And this club was made very special by a former Lynn resident of 150 years ago, William Arms.
He was one of the great characters of 19th century Lynn. He was born in 1804, died in 1872. He came from a seafaring family, I think, and indeed he went on the famous route from Lynn to Newcastle, taking barley and other foodstuffs to Newcastle in return for the black gold from the mines of Durham and Northumberland, coming down to Lynn. For about eight years he was in this trade. He's what is called a master mariner, and many master mariners lived in the Friars area, as opposed to the North End, which were the fisher folk. Well, after about 8 years, William had enough of that. It was a very hard life. He describes it very well in his writings. And he bought a business on land. It was mainly making ropes. I think the business had been involved in sail making and other things before. But the business made ropes, of course, still much needed by shipping. In the Tuesday Marketplace, that was the location where the present Job Centre is, Job Centre Plus. It was on that site, William Arms and Company. He was only 54 when he gave a series of lectures at a new building, and it was called the Athenaeum. The Athenaeum was on Baxter's Plain, where the present post office is. It was demolished for the present post office in the late 1930s. The Athenaeum was opened in the mid-1850s, and it was kind of it was an art centre, a cultural centre for Kings Lynn. And in 1858, William gave a series of talks or lectures on Lynn and how it had changed, and of course it had changed a great deal. He talked about the town and the buildings and the changes. He talks about the Friars era. He remembers Checker Street being built in the 1840s, and he talks about other new buildings. It reminds us that although Lynn was now losing its river and sea traffic, it did adapt as a market town. There were great changes, and he spoke very well, and he eventually had the lectures published, or the lectures were published by the Lynn Advertiser.
And within the extensive archives of Trews Yard Fishing Museum, there are copies of those articles which are available for researchers.
I think he died while those articles were being published, and I think the series of articles finished soon after his death. He's a man who was eloquent, great humanitarian. He had vision about what could happen to Lynn. It wouldn't decline, it could become an important port once again. And it is strange that we have no main street or road named after William Arms. We certainly need to think about doing something to make his name better known. He's buried at Hardwick Cemetery, but I don't think the monument exists anymore. Maybe we could resurrect something, or maybe the next major square or road or street in Kings Lynn, we should name it William Arms Street, because he's someone who deserves more recognition than he has got since his death in 1872.